for a long time. Anyway, I wanted to be a rock star, I wanted to be a cowboy, I wanted to be a flight attendant, I wanted to be a lawyer, and I wanted to be a geneticist. But I turned out to be a reporter. My first job was at the Dairy Queen in Zionsville, Indiana, where I can still make a dip cone with a curly Q on top. But fast forwarding, I've been a television reporter since 1975. And you're doing math now, right? Yeah. I've wired myself with hidden cameras and confronted corrupt politicians and chased down criminals and gone undercover and in disguise. And it's been amazing. It's been an incredible experience. Learning to tell a story as a reporter has been life-changing for me. But one day when I was 55, which was 17 years ago, maybe more, I just had a really good idea for a mystery. And I said to my husband, I've got a great idea. I'm going to write a book. And Jonathan says, great, honey. He said, do you know how to write a book? And I'm like, how hard can it be? You know, I've read 1 million books. I soon learned how hard it can be, and it really brings tears to my eyes to come from the Dairy Queen to this. So thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you. Robert Dugoni.
I don't have anything exciting like that, or like him. I grew up in a family of 10 kids. I was the middle child. My older brothers and sisters, I have 5 doctors. They're all compulsive overachievers. So I took the tact in grammar school that I would screw around and get in trouble, and I did. And I finally found in the 6th grade a nun, Sister Mary Williams. I got a great story, I'll keep it brief, but Sister Mary Williams liked boys. And she said to my mom, he's a good boy. Bobby's a good boy, Patty. He's a good boy. He just needs more things to do. So my mother started giving me books. So by the time I was 12 years old, I had read The Great Gatsby, The Old Man and the Sea, The Count of Monte Cristo, Red Badge of Courage, you name it. The biggest mistake I made is when I got to high school and they started handing out those books to write essays, and I said, I already read them all. I should have just kept my mouth shut. I would have been ahead. But, so I owe a lot to Sister Mary Williams. Fast forward, I'm writing books, I'm writing novels. I read a book called The Extraordinary Life of Sam Hell about a young boy with ocular albinism. And he goes to school at a school that's really similar to the school I went to. And he has a teacher really similar to Sister Mary Williams. And my mom said, it's too bad you never told her what she meant to you. It means a lot to teachers. And I thought, it really is, but she's got to be dead. She has to be, And so I felt bad about it. About 2.5 weeks ago, I got an email from a woman. She said, my name is Joan so-and-so, and I live in Burlingame, California, and my kids all go to Our Lady of Angels Grammar School, and my aunt, like Jennifer something, was a teacher at OLA, and she sounds a lot like your Sister Mary Williams. We always called her Aunt Jen, but her Catholic name was Sister Mary Williams. And I went, oh my God. I said, yes. It is Sister Mary Williams, and I told her the story that I just told you, and she said, Sister Mary Williams had 35 nieces and nephews. This will mean so much to her. And I said, please tell them, and I wrote them an email about how much Sister Mary Williams meant to me, and she was able to share it with the 37 nieces and nephews. So somewhere up there, somebody gave me the opportunity to help, or not help, but to thank a teacher for what she did for me. That's who I am.
Wow, what a great story. Robert, corporate spy.
Yes. Good morning. Do we need this now?
Yeah, probably do.
There you go. You think a former actor would be able to figure that out. My great-grandfather sold horse carriages before automobiles were invented. And then he switched to selling cars. And my grandfather took over that dealership. My father took over that dealership. And I was supposed to take over that dealership. But when I was in college, I fell in love with acting. And when I graduated, I wanted to move to New York to try to be an actor, but that just seemed insane. There were no artists in my family, so I went to work for my dad in the car business. But I found the trickery of car sales just didn't sit right with me. So I finally got the courage to move to New York to be an actor, and of course actors need survival jobs. And who stumbles into a career as a corporate spy? But that's what I did, which is fairly ironic since corporate spying ended up being far more ethically challenging than car sales. And so my book is that crazy story. And of course, I was a working actor. I took J-Lo to a Dodgers game. I drank beers with Paul Newman. I did off-Broadway shows with James Gandolfini. I have a Star Trek card. I was on Melrose Place. But all the time that I was doing those crazy things and having all those crazy experiences, dancing with O.J. Simpson before he became the infamous individual that he is today, but I went deeper and deeper into the world of corporate espionage to the point where I was known as the world's greatest corporate spy. So that's my story.
Fascinating. And it's all outlined in his book. You'll love every minute of it. Michelle.
Hello. Thank you guys all for coming. I see a lot of familiar faces, so good to see you again. I grew up here in San Diego. I'm local. I'm a big reader. I was one of those kids that would go to the library, check out 10 books, have to go back the next day, check out 10 more. And I started writing. My parents gave me a book on my 10th birthday called Someday You'll Write, and from that day, I would just write, horrible short stories and terrible novels. I graduated from high school and I went on the other side of the country to the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia, and I majored in accounting because that's what writers do. He needed a day job, I needed a day job. I knew my parents weren't going to support a starving artist, and I genuinely liked accounting. I thought it was great. So I went into accounting, eventually switched to finance. I've worked with a lot of shifty companies, so you might be familiar with some of them. You probably worked at some of them. And I ended up dragging my husband he's from Virginia, dragging him back to San Diego, which wasn't too hard of a sell. But all this time I was writing and writing and writing. I didn't really know what I was going to do with it. I was climbing up in my career, having children, and then one day I decided, I'm going to try to do something with this writing thing. I'm going to try to get an agent. And so I polished up a manuscript, sent it to an agent, or not an agent, hundreds of agents or whatever, like we all do. Eventually, I signed with an agent, and she tried to shop that book, but it didn't sell, and I wrote another book, and that one didn't sell, so I just kept writing and writing until eventually, after she worked for me for 5.5 years, she sold my first novel, A Paris Apartment. So by that time, it was a few weeks before I turned 40, so it was a 30-year journey to get to publication from when I was 10 and got that book from my parents. And I continued for several years as an executive, head of investor relations for a large publicly traded software company. And it's actually very similar when you do these NDR, non-deal roadshows where you're trying to get people to buy your stock. Very similar to a book tour, only it's like, this is a better audience, because you guys aren't trying to get me on anything or try to trip me up. So that is my career, and I started writing full-time about my third or fourth book, and then I still do some investor relations consulting work on the side, because that's fun. I like that side of it. So that's me.
Well, we're glad you transitioned to writing for sure. And just a reminder, you'll see the screen behind us that we have all the social media handles for our authors. So if any of you guys are social media savvy and want to be tweeting or taking photos and tagging these authors or adventures by the book during the day, feel free. We'd love that. So you have all successfully nailed what it takes to write a nail-biter book. So I want to know how you actually accomplish that. What goes into the writing of a book of suspense? Giving away enough to lead the readers without giving too much away that keeps us on the edge of our seats and wanting more. Hank, you've clearly nailed it. I have heard so many amazing things about her book that was just released. So tell us your secret.
You want to know how to write a book? I have no idea. I have no idea. You know, it's interesting. After 43 years as a reporter, I've learned how I think to tell a story. You know, when I put my investigations on television, I don't want you to turn the channel. And when you're reading my novels, I don't want you to be able to put them down. I always say, I want you to miss your stop on the subway because you just can't put the book down. And so I think in writing a novel, I begin with this core gem of a gorgeous, irresistible idea. In The House Guest, for instance, how well do you really know that person who's sharing the pillow next to you? Could they be keeping a secret? And if you found that out, what would you do? Would you tell or would you protect them? And that's what the main character is doing, Alyssa McAllen in The House Guest. So I thought, what if I made it be Gaslight meets Thelma and Louise meets Strangers on a Train? Now, you think you know what that is, but the author might be gaslighting you along the way. So I think the key of writing a good suspense novel is exactly like writing an irresistible, compelling television story. You need a character who you care about, a problem that needs to be solved. You want the good guys to win and the bad guys to get what's coming to them. And in the end, you want some justice and you want to change the world a little bit. And that's what I've done in my investigative reporting, I hope, and that's what I hope to do with these novels. I want you to, when you're finished with the book, I want you to say, oh, that was a good book, she got me, with a surprising but inevitable ending. That, you know, when we were little and someone would say to us, once upon a time, and the world would fall away and the walls would fall away, and all there is this great story. And that's what I try to channel in my novels, just telling you a marvelous, irresistible story. Does that make sense to you?
Perfectly, yes. Love it.
Easier said than done. I guess if I channel Stephen King. Stephen King said, no matter what you're writing, you need to have tension on every page. So I've written police procedurals, I've written legal thrillers, I've written literary, I've written legal, historical. I have coming out in next year, and the driving factor in every story is tension, right? If you're going to write a scene, then how can you make that scene tense? A lot of times we call it a third element, right? You might have a scene where someone's having a normal conversation out on a bench. There's no tension there. Well, what if there's a storm coming and the guy's trying to get across a point and the storm keeps getting closer and getting closer and getting closer? So you learn a lot of these tricks as you go along on how to keep the tension building and building and building. And then what Hank said is very true. It doesn't matter how much tension you have if you hate the main character. Right? We've all read those books where we're like, I just wish this person would die. Get it over with. So it's very, very important that you have a character on the page that people like, that people empathize with. Tracy Crosswhite came to me one morning, like Sam Hell came to me one morning and just started talking to me. I do not outline my books. I do not know how they're going to end. A lot of times I do not know who the killer is. I just tell the story that is being told to me. And Tracy told me this story about growing up in a small town in the North Cascades. She was tasked with bringing her sister home after a single accident shooting competition that they were both in. Bring your sister home was the last words her father told her. Well, her boyfriend showed up. They were getting engaged that night. The sister drove home by herself, never made it home. What happened to her? I don't know. And Tracy starts looking and looking and looking. She becomes a Seattle homicide detective, the first female homicide detective. She's based upon the actual Seattle's first female homicide detective named Jennifer Southworth. Terrific lady. And you talk about channeling things. This story was being told to me and I was thinking, I had this vision of a 5'10" blonde woman who's just a crack shot, a great shooter. And I was told to go talk to this guy named Scott Tompkins, who was a King County homicide sheriff. I went and talked to Scott. I started telling him my story. This is what I want to do. And he's looking at me kind of funny. And finally he says to me, "You ought to talk to my girlfriend." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because she is Seattle's first female homicide detective. She's 5'10" and she's blonde." And I swear to God, I looked at him, I said, "I never met her. I don't know who she is." So, you know, you got to have a character that you like. And the people that have really gripped onto the Tracy Crossway, so they've gripped onto her as a human being. People ask me all the time, how do you write from the perspective of a woman? I don't. I write from the perspective of a human being who has this grievous injury inside of her, and she's dealing with that while she's trying to be the best she can be at the job she's undertaken, which is a homicide detective, which is really all of us, right? All of us have those things inside of us that, whether it's the loss of a spouse or a child or whatever it is, that we're dealing with that while we're trying to be the best that we can be at whatever is our chosen profession. And that's what I try to do when I write the Tracy books.
Wonderful.
I think the hardest thing for me was waiting for the statute of limitations to expire on any potential crimes that I may or may not have committed. So once that was safely passed, I was able to write my book. I finished it during COVID. Obviously, that was a terrible time, and so I really wanted to write a book that was fun to read. That's a page turner, and it does read like a spy novel, but everything in it is true. I'd like to say I've written an honest book about lying. We all know the Russians spy on the Chinese, and we certainly know that the Chinese spy on us with the spy balloons recently. But most people are shocked to find out how much money corporations spend on a daily basis spying on each other and the lengths that they're willing to go to. And so that was something that I really wanted to illuminate in the book in a way that is kind of insane. The shenanigans and the hijinks that corporate America is willing to do. You know, you think about football, of course, and I was at the Super Bowl, by the way. So I'm the only person here that was at the Super Bowl and SuperBook. So I think that's the big thing that I was proud with the book, is that I was able to illuminate the duplicity. So many of the people you see on CNBC talking about corporate culture and corporate ethics, the investor relations people, and yet those same people were greedily gobbling up my secrets and did not care how that information was obtained. And that's something that I think people don't know and enjoy kind of getting a peek behind the curtain. So thank you.
Well, I feel like I get to cheat a little bit compared to some of these other writers, since yours is a true story, but all my books are based on real people or real situations. So that does help, and the background of a war is going to amp up the tension just inherently. So everybody here has given really good advice. I think one of the problems that you can struggle with in historical fiction when you're writing about a real person is that you don't want to just have it be, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened. It's not just a biography or a retelling of a timeline. You do have to have a story arc, a character arc to increase that tension and have them have real problems dealing with the war and then their own internal struggles that Robert's alluded to as well. My main character, she's working in Rome at the end of the war. It's after the city's been liberated, but before the war's ended, and her group is in charge of propaganda. They're sending out propaganda to the Nazi troops. It's supposed to look like it's coming from their own people, from Germans, but it's really coming from the Allies, and it's basically telling them to give up. So it's this black propaganda, it's misinformation, many things that are relevant to today. So you do have to have that balance of you're telling a story, but it can't just be a list of facts and cool things that happened, which that definitely could be a problem with historical fiction. You want to jam some neat fact in there that doesn't really serve the story. So that's from my perspective.
Thank you. And so I know each of you have talked a little bit about your books, but I want to go into a little more detail without revealing too much because we want everyone to buy the book and to get it signed. But can you share a little bit about your book, the premise for it, anything you want to share that you feel is not giving too much away? We'd love to hear more. Sure.
Yeah, it's very difficult since I write suspense and thrillers to tell you about the novel without giving anything away, but I have figured out a way to do it. There was a sort of a quiz on Twitter that said, can you describe your novel in 5 words? So I thought, yeah, I can do that, 5 words, and then it turned out to be far more difficult than I thought. But here's my 5 words. Greed, divorce, betrayal, sisterhood, and revenge. Greed, divorce, betrayal, sisterhood, and revenge. So then on Facebook, so that gives you an idea. So on Facebook, because you have more characters on Facebook to use, it said describe your book in 5 phrases. So fine, 5 phrases. 5 phrases for the house guest are a gorgeous house on Cape Cod, a disturbing gaslighting divorce, a sympathetic FBI agent, a brand new best friend, and an emerald necklace. So quickly, in The House Guest, Alyssa McCallan wakes up one morning. She is devastated. She is terrified. She is shocked. Her husband, who she thought was in love with her and who she thought she was in love with of 8 years, has walked out on her inexplicably. What makes it worse is that he seems to be trying to ruin her life. He's sneaking in when she's not home and leaving nasty clues, ripping her dresses out of her closet, leaving a knife on the kitchen floor. He's taken all the friends. He's threatened to take the house and her life away and all of their money. She's terrified and alone and worried because her husband is incredibly manipulative. This is something that has just been revealed. And when the FBI shows up at the door, poor Alyssa knows she really needs a friend. And then she gets one, a brand new, seductive best friend who is running from dangers of her own. And the new best friend suggests that maybe they can solve each other's problems. So 2 smart women facing off in a high-stakes psychological cat and mouse game to prove their truth about a devastating betrayal. But which character is the cat and which character is the mouse? And my final thing is, in a shocking divorce, you can't always get what you want, but sometimes you get what you deserve. And that is The House Guest.
I love it.
Channeling a little inner Mick Jagger, are we? Yeah. I had an idea. This is the 10th book, I believe, in the Tracy Crosswhite series. And I had this idea where I wanted to write a series within the series. So series are interesting and they're difficult because the story doesn't continue, but the characters continue. And I wanted to write a mini-series, if you will, within the series where not only would the characters continue, but that the story would continue, but that each story would in and of itself be a complete book. So nobody felt like, oh, I have to read the next, right? You always want to feel, as a reader, you want to feel like a book is complete. So I had this idea, and I talked about it with my editor, and we started with a short story called The Last Line. And The Last Line is about a character who's in all my Tracy books named Del Castigliano. And he's a homicide detective. He works on the A-team with Tracy. And it's the story of him, how he comes to Seattle, and he finds out that there is a corrupt group of narcotics agents working in the Seattle Police Department, and they call themselves The Last Line. And it's a pun on the words, right? The last line could be cocaine, or it can be nobody's getting past us. We're the last line of defense. Turns out they're corrupt. Dell figures this out. Now you fast forward to what she found. A reporter, an investigative reporter, goes missing. She's been gone for 25 years. Nobody knows what happened to her. They think she just left. There's some indications that the husband could have killed her. They don't know what's going on. They never find the body. They never are able to convict anybody. Tracy, in the prior book, is up in where she used to live in the North Cascades because she's had a baby. So she's been on maternity leave. She comes back to find that her captain, who she does not get along with, Johnny Nolasco, has given her job on the A-team to another woman. So she can't accuse him of sexism or anything like that. The only job they have available, which is the equivalent of a homicide detective, is to work cold cases. So she reluctantly takes cold cases, thinking it'll give her more time, more scheduled time where she can be at home with her daughter. So she takes it, and in comes this young woman. She's a reporter for the Post-Intelligencer and says, "Can you find my mother? She disappeared 30 years ago." And what Tracy finds is the mother was investigating 5 stories, one of which was about the corrupt narcotics agents. Another is about a serial killer. Another is about the mayor, who's modeled after Willie Brown in San Francisco, who had a whole long line of people suspected him to be corrupt. I grew up in San Francisco. So this book is about the story where the young daughter comes to Tracy and says, "Can you find my mother?" And what she's going to have to dig into is her friend Del Castigliano's work back 30 years ago on the last line. She's worried about that. She's going to have to do some work with the guy she can't stand, which is Johnny Nolasco, and she's got to try to find out what happened to the reporter. The next book continues the miniseries, if you will. It's called One Last Kill, and it's still about those 5 files that this woman had and what she was working on. So this is the book that follows the short story. You do not have to read the short story in order to understand what's going on in this book, but Tracy's looking for this reporter who disappeared 30 years ago and what happened to her.
I always find it hard to tell the story of Ruse without giving too much away. I think the best thing maybe to say is when I was reading some early parts of it at a writer's conference, people really responded to it and freaked out about it because they just had no idea this kind of corporate spying went on. And the publisher of the book said the same thing. They said nobody from the inside that was a corporate spy has ever written a book. And they, when you get a book accepted, then they begin to solicit blurbs, right, testimonials. And so they went to, I didn't even know they did this. They sent one to Frank Abagnale, who wrote Catch Me If You Can. And to my shock, to their shock, he flipped out over the book. And he wrote the blurb that's on the cover. And so I always, rather than tell the story of Ruse, I say, if you liked Catch Me If You Can, it's basically the same story. And he's been such an amazing guy, by the way, and everyone knows the movie Catch Me If You Can, but the book is really even better than the movie. There's scenes that are in the book that aren't in the movie. So if you haven't read that book, it's an incredible read. And he, not only has he blurbed my book, but now because he's a little bit older now, so he's recommended me to fill in for him at speaking things because he doesn't want to travel as much. So if it's a terrible place and it's far away and they don't pay any money, he recommends me, which is really, really nice. But I never complain for obvious reasons, but also because of his blurb, Ruse is now in development for a TV series. Yeah, and that's entirely because when the Catch Me If You Can guy says something nice, then people in Hollywood pay attention. So that's all about Ruse. Thank you.
Congratulations.
I agree that Catch Me If You Can is a fantastic book, much better than the movie. All of the movies also great. I talked a little bit about my book. The main character, her name is Nikki. She's based on a real spy that was in Rome at the end of the war, working with a ragtag group to produce this propaganda. Because remember, they had to have a lot of different talents. You needed to be able to write fluently in German, for example, if you're going to make it appear it's a German newspaper or leaflet. They developed this, they had all these little plans, and all the plans in my book are from what really happened. One of their things is they decided to print these, they were interviewing prisoners of war, and they were talking, what upsets you the most? What really gets to you the most? Because they're trying to figure out how to do psychological, warfare on the enemy. And the most, do you get upset when you hear about bombings in your hometown or rations or this or that? And they're like, the thought that made them the most upset was, their wife going off with someone else while they were gone. So they set up Nikki, the real character, her name was Barbara, but I wanted to give myself some leeway, so I changed her name so I could make up more things. She devised this plan called the League of Lonely War Wives. There was a bunch of different names, but that was the main one, and they would print in these underground newspapers. It was basically a letter, hey, soldiers, we know you're lonely. We support you. If you meet us when you're on leave at this bar at this time and wear this little heart pinned to your lapel, we can have a night of fun. And, your wives are also doing this too, so you might as well do it yourself. And so they would lure these men into these bars with these hearts, hoping for a assignation. So that was one of her many creative endeavors, her little plots and plans, and there was a group of them. One was a famous cartoonist, Saul Steinberg, who you would recognize him. He's very famous in The New Yorker, and it's just kind of about them trying to help end the war and bring about, this. They could feel it coming, but it still felt so far away. We all know how that's like with COVID, right? Where you're like, this feels like it's going to end, but yet it's so far away, and we've been doing this so long, so it's that. And then the overall idea is how propaganda and misinformation affects the people that are receiving it, as well as the people that are creating it, which, few parallels to today.
And who doesn't love a good female spy?
Yes.
I know our time is winding down. I have so many more questions for you, but the audience is filled, both our virtual audience and our in-person audience is filled with readers and librarians and people who are members of book clubs. So what is it when you write that you want your reading fans to get out of your books? Is there a certain message, something that you feel you want to connect with them over? What do you want readers to get out of your books?
You were just talking about COVID, and it's so interesting. When I was in the midst of writing one of my novels, I might have been The House Guest, and I was on a plane. No, it was Her Perfect Life. It was Her Perfect Life. I was in West Palm Beach on book tour, and it was a wonderful event. And it was March 13th, 2020, and I was terrified. And all I wanted to do, there was a room full of people to buy my book, and all I wanted to do was go home. So I went to the Palm Beach airport after this event, and it was when people were starting to wear masks, but not always. And a woman in the waiting area pulled down her mask. She was wearing a mask. She pulled down her mask, sneezed, and then put the mask back on. And I thought, no, this is not how this is supposed to be. So I got on the plane, and one of the places that I love to write the most is on the plane, because I think it's enclosed, you have a destination, you have a deadline, you're just in this tube by yourself. And I opened my laptop to write Her Perfect Life, and I couldn't do it. I stared at the screen, and I thought, why am I writing a novel of suspense and a novel of, a propulsive, entertaining, that's my goal, to entertain you, an entertaining story. Why am I doing this? I should be home stockpiling light bulbs or, aluminum foil. I don't know, I should be doing something. And it crossed my mind that I was so terrified. And I thought, 15 years ago, I decided to write fiction with agency and determination and confidence and joy and passion because I love storytelling. And I realized that now was the time that it was more important than ever to write a good, propulsive, compelling story because we need to escape. We need to escape. We need to solve someone else's problem and live in someone else's dilemma and take ourselves away from this, undefined terror that we were living in. And it crossed my mind at that moment, and I get goosebumps saying this to you, it crossed my mind, it's always safe inside a book. It's always safe inside a book. And I kind of turned to my manuscript with renewed joy because my goal is to take you away. My goal is to have you forget everything else but the book. And in the end, I want you to think, I'm changed because of this. I solved someone else's problem. I lived through someone else's dilemma. I want you to say, and I hope you do, what a good story. And that's my goal.
I'd like to know who set this up that I have to follow her every time.
Just 3 little words, you all. 8 million books.
I feel very blessed. I really do. All of us are different. All of us come to a book with different backgrounds, different life experiences, and I can't predict what each and every one of you is going to bring to a book. All I try to write is a book that you can immerse yourself in because of that background or life experiences that you have had. And I can't tell you what it means to me when I receive emails from individuals about what my book meant to them. I'll share with you just one. Someone wrote to me and she said, I feel like we have this connection. She said, I'm the 5th child in a family of 10. My youngest brother is Michael. Michael is dying of pancreatic cancer. So every night, my brothers and sisters gather around his bed and we read to him The Extraordinary Life of Sam Hell because it's a book about hope and it's a book about faith, and we want Michael to be comforted. Now, if that doesn't make you get teary, right? And to think that when I wrote that book, I never thought about any of that. All I wanted was for people to have whatever that life experience is that made the book personal to them, that's what they would get out of it. So when you receive something like that, you realize that there is a certain trust that you undertake when you write a novel. And it's a wonderful thing, but it also makes you pause. It really does, because you never know what the person reading your book is going to bring to that particular story. But that's all I want, is whoever you are as a person, your experiences, that you can bring that to the story and find some joy and some personal meaning in the book that I've written.
Wow.
I forgot the question.
What you want readers to get out of your book?
Yes, so I was an actor, and Joanne Woodward and Paul Newman made me a member of the Actors Studio. And the Actors Studio revolutionized acting, basically starting with Marlon Brando. Before Marlon Brando, acting was sort of presentational, and Marlon Brando in the Actors Studio invented this thing, the method, which actually came from Russia, and this very famous acting teacher there. Anyway, the thing that Pacino and De Niro and Jane Fonda and Joanne Woodward and Paul Newman and all of these amazing, Sally Field, all these amazing performers did is they came from themselves, right? It was as personal could be. And obviously it changed acting forever. And so when I write, that's what I try to do, is I try to make it as personal as I can. So in my previous book, Malibu Burning, it's about me and my family fighting to save our home. 17 of 19 on our street burned to the ground. And then I take you inside the community of Malibu, because everybody thinks they know Malibu and they think everybody in Malibu is rich and famous, and I'm here to tell you that's not true. and how people came together and saved entire communities by themselves. 80-year-old couple were putting out fires with their feet. And then the same thing in Ruse, is I take you inside this world of what it's like to be, this insane world of being a corporate spy, and also a professional actor at the same time. And so that's what I try to do, and I try to do it with some humor. Even in Malibu Burning, obviously it was a terrible time, and of course wildfires have become not just a California issue, not just a US issue, but a global issue. And now I write on wildfires all the time. But even in that, there's humor to be found, where people have done amazing things, and they're saving communities, and they're doing all this, and they don't realize that their fly is open the entire time that they're doing that, which is a true story. So there's just So anyway, so for me, from my acting background, everything has to just be super personal.
I'll just echo a lot of what all the writers up here have said. You want it to touch somebody in some way. They walk away, even if they were just entertained. One woman said, my first book inspired her to start an antique shop. And she calls it the perfect provenance, which is funny because that's like the main criticism of Paris Apartment. All these people are like, she uses that word so much. And this woman used that word for her antique store. And I also had a similar experience that Hank had in those early days of COVID, where I actually signed a book deal in March, and then I was trying to write my book because I sold it on a proposal, and I was thinking, God, this is the most pointless job. I'm just writing stuff. Like, why am I doing this? And then I realized I was reading so many books during that time. That's what I was doing, because I got so much out of reading myself that, okay. Because it felt so silly, right? I wasn't saving lives, but it is an escape. And I love what you said about that. And then on a more just kind of lighter level, I just love it when somebody says that one of my books made them Google something or go down some rabbit hole because they'd never heard of such and such person or this place or this situation. And that always is very gratifying, because I do a lot of research, and it's fun to bring, a new tidbit to people.
I know we could talk to them all day, but we have a lot more panels. This was amazing. One more round of applause for Hank, Phillippi, Ryan, Robert Dugoni, Robert Kerbeck, and Michelle Gable.